Welcome to Season 5 of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from around the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Today's episode was brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. Thanks for watching the show. Enjoy.
Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Rob Volpe, who is an astute observer of life and a master storyteller who brings empathy and compassion to the human experience. As CEO of Ignite 360, he leads a team of insights, strategy, and creative professionals serving the world's leading brands across a range of industries. As a thought leader in the role of empathy and marketing in the workplace, Rob frequently speaks on the topic at conferences, corporations, and college classes. His book, coming out in 2022, February of next spring, tell me more about that. Solving the Empathy Crisis One Conversation at a Time is what we will explore today. He's a graduate of Syracuse University's SI, Newhouse School of Public Communications, and lives in San Francisco with his husband and 3 cats, which we just spoke about. Welcome to the show, Rob. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Anita. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I am really excited to dig deep into your work. Starting with, I guess, the question, you've developed sort of the 5 steps to empathy. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The genesis of recognizing that we needed the 5 steps came about, 8-9 years ago. University of Michigan came out with a study showing that did a meta-analysis of college life surveys from 1979 to 2009, found that there was a decline of about 40% in people's ability to have empathy with each other, just for college students to see the point of view of their classmates. And, I saw that piece mentioned on CNN and they were like, oh my gosh, that's not good. But nobody was talking about what to do about that. And then you'd start to hear, cultural commentators talking about how we need more empathy. And you started to see the polarization in the United States of society and the red and the blue states and everything there. And again, the call was going out on, we got to have some empathy. And we were even hearing it from our clients in corporate America, like, we want to go get empathy with our consumers. And so typically what was happening is everyone would go, okay, well, that means I need to go, live the way that they live. I need to eat the foods that they eat, watch the TV shows that they're watching. But there's a gap. There's a huge gap between doing those activities and actually having empathy. You need to understand what's going on in your head and in your own heart that might be preventing you from getting to empathy. And what are the things you need to actually do internally in order to, when you have those experiences, that you can actually have an empathetic experience. And so understanding, like, okay, there's a gap. How do we do this? How do I do that as an empathetic individual myself? And the work that we do, where we're talking and listening to strangers and hearing their stories about how they're thinking and feeling and behaving around values and day-to-day life, I was able to start to think about how I was going through that and what I needed to do to get to an empathy connection, but also how I was coaching my clients and helping them get to it as well, because they were wanting to build that bridge. And it was through that the 5 steps were born. It started to just become pretty evident. Judgment was the very first thing that was getting in people's way, and the rest of it just kind of went from there.
So unpack what those 5 steps are. I mean, I don't know if you can use sort of a case study of an organization without naming them, but I'd be really keen to sort of really understand those better.
Sure. So the very first step, and I think the biggest hurdle that most people face, is dismantling their judgment. What ends up, and there's 2 different types of judgment. There's making a judgment, which is the should I walk down that dark alley or not? Does that feel safe? Or what's the best decision that we need to make? That's a form of judgment making. That's good. And then there's being judgmental. And that's the one that gets in the way of empathy. It's about the casting aspersions. In my presentations, I used to show a picture of Michelle Yeoh's character in Crazy Rich Asians, because that's what she did all the time, was cast aspersion. She was being judgmental of her potential future daughter-in-law and everybody around her. And that's what hampers us and harms us. And judgment for folks comes from, and that what leads you to the point of actually casting aspersion, it comes from your own biases. It comes from stereotypes that you may have or that society has had and embedded into your mind. It comes from your past experiences, all of those things. And it's just constant, and it's churning around. And if you think back to us pre-civilization, caveman sort of time, and we're tribal by nature, and making judgments and identifying the other and keeping the other out was necessary for the survival of the tribe. What's happened now in the 20th century and into the 21st century is we've transcended the smaller definitions of tribe, and we are, I believe, moving towards a larger definition of the human tribe. And how do we get there? And that's where we're running into tensions, because we're having trouble overcoming some of those barriers, those stereotypes that are ingrained in us that, oh, well, you're, a Democrat, therefore you are this, or you're of this ethnicity, or whatever the situation may be. So dismantling judgment is the very first thing. And it so much of it is around awareness of even having judgment. And in my book, I tell stories from my experiences going into people's homes, getting to know them, and things that I needed to do to overcome my own judgment, and then also help my clients. One of the stories I tell is a chapter entitled Fear, and it's about a project we did for a client where we got to go to the NRA gun show, the National Rifle Association, to their annual huge, massive gun show, to talk to people about carry and conceal of weapons. And I'm a gay white man living in San Francisco. I'm left of center. I'm not an advocate of carrying guns, but was really fascinated to understand what would prompt people to do that. And so as I write in the book, what I found, and I used some excerpts from the conversations that I had with real people to illustrate this, but it was all grounded in, they weren't sure what was out there. They were afraid of the unknown, of what might happen. Well, I'm going into the city and that's not necessarily safe, so I want to be able to protect myself or my wife. And then I'd ask, well, how often are you going into the city? Once every, year. We live out in the suburbs. And it kind of made me question, and this is me being judgmental, but it's like, okay, well, how scary is that Olive Garden that you're going to, for dinner? And is this a real fear that you have? Is it grounded in, what's it grounded in? What's it really rooted in? And over again, this notion of fear kept coming up. That was what was motivating people to carry a weapon with them. They were afraid of what could happen. We then moved on, left the NRA show, I did some focus groups in Philadelphia, and we had a combination of, I remember it was a group of men, and we had, if it was a group of 8, maybe half were from the suburbs. I call them the Daves. And then the other half were more inner city urban residents, and very different lived experiences between the two groups. And where the Daves were talking about, and again, I'm just using the Daves, like I'm being judgmental about them, but I'm also describing them, and it's good for the story. But the guys from the suburbs, the Daves, again, the fear notions were coming up. It's a scary world, not sure what we're going to run into. And then I asked the guys that were from the inner city or the urban residents, and they had actual experiences and stories. And the barber guy worked at the barber shop, who was like, yeah, I have 2 guns, one that's on me and then one that's in the till. Because, after dark, people come in and, the ones that are looking for trouble, and they got the hoodie up and all the things. And he explained it. And that lived experience, another guy told a story about walking down the street and having a car trail him that had some gang members or some group that he recognized was out for no good. He happened to have his gun with him, was able to kind of lift up his jacket enough to reveal that he was carrying a weapon. And that changed, it prevented an interaction from happening. And he was convinced that they were going to come and do whatever, harm him, possibly kill him. So for the guys from the suburbs, these are their worst fears, brought to life. very different experiences that people have, still concerned based on fear of bad things that could happen. One that's living in an environment where it does happen more often and is more common, and another where there's the possibility or they are afraid of it. Fascinating stuff. And then got all the other learning that we were really there to get about carry, conceal, and how they do it, and things that they choose to wear, accessories and whatnot. Come back to San Francisco, have brunch with some friends who are also a gay couple, San Francisco, lean to the left, and bring up like, oh my God, I was at the NRA show, and then we went and did these focus groups, and you wouldn't believe. And my friends started to talk about how they didn't feel that people should be carrying guns. And when I probed into it and we continued the conversation, it turned out, well, they're actually afraid as well. And my friends, their whole feeling was based on fear. And they're afraid of what somebody with a gun is going to do. And it could be that suburban Dave or somebody in an inner city, wherever. They were just afraid of that. So it's like, all right, so both sides are actually coming at this from a place of fear. If we were able to have a conversation, understanding that and having empathy with each other, that we're just afraid of what could be and of what the other side, what their fears are, you could do a lot to dissuade that fear, to dissolve it and make them feel more comfortable.
What I'm going to just say in response to everything you've just shared is that I think empathy is super subversive. And, we would not have the gun sales that we have if there was more empathy in the world. That's what you're describing, right? So, so fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. And the power that empathy can have to get you to that point of understanding. But had I not dismantled my own judgment, had I not faced my discomfort of being, the gun show was in St. Louis. That's a pretty red area. With, people that are gun owners, that's a pretty Republican, right-leaning. I was feeling threatened for no reason. Nobody threatened me, but I just felt uncomfortable. And so I was putting up walls of judgment to protect myself. Had I not been able to dismantle that and step out of it, I wouldn't have heard what they were really saying and gotten to that deeper level of understanding. And so that's dismantling judgment is the first step, which then enables you to ask good questions, which is the second step. And that's about asking open-ended questions. So not challenging people with why, or a closed question is like a yes, no, maybe. Like if you can give a one-word answer to a question, that's usually a sign of a closed question. Nobody's going to be able to explain their position if you're just giving them the choice of yes, no, or maybe. You want to be able to hear where people are coming from and what they're all about. That's what helps you build empathy with them. So asking an open question, an exploratory question. I tell a story in the book about a woman that we met who was living in Alabama, and we pulled up to her house. It was an in-home interview. We pulled up to her house, and she was actually outside tending to her dog and the litter of puppies that the dog had had. And we hop out, we're grabbing our stuff and just say, hey, how are you? And she started, more than just the usual, oh, I'm good. Emma Jean is her name. She's a natural storyteller. And she just went into her story and started telling us all of these things because I asked this very open question. I just said, how are you? How are you doing? And I find that that's something that's missing as well for a lot of people, and especially in the environment we've been living in with the pandemic and all of the events, the social unrest and injustice that we've been struggling with for since the beginning of 2020. We're not taking the time to just ask, how are you? And really check in and to comfort each other and to listen and to be open to what people have to say and to receive that. But you need to be able to do that in order to build empathy. So asking good questions or questions that are going to be exploratory in nature. I also always say, and I learned this when I was trained to become a moderator, never to use the word why when you're asking people questions, because why puts people on the defensive. Because when, from the time that they were a child, parent or somebody in a place of authority would say, why exactly? Why did you draw on the wall? Why did you cut your sister's hair? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And it continues into adulthood. Why are you constantly late to work? Why is that report not ready? Why did you, do this, do that? You're always just on the defensive. Your reaction to it is defensive. It's not going to open you up to get to real exploration and an understanding of what's going on. So when you're trying to connect with somebody, to have empathy with somebody, you need to ask good questions. And they need to be broad and exploratory and non-threatening.
Good. So we've covered 2. You ready for the other 3?
We can go through the other 3. Third one is actively listen. Mm-hmm. Active listening isn't just about your ears and the words that you're hearing, but it's about what else you're sensing and what you're seeing and what you're taking in the environment. So one of my favorite stories, there was an in-home that we went into, and the asked, kind of opening question of, hi, introduce yourself, what's going on in your life? And he started talking about his nephew. Respondent's name is Jonathan. He started talking about his nephew that had passed away. And only, I think, a month earlier, perhaps. So it was still really raw. The nephew was in his early mid-20s, had Ewing sarcoma, had been battling that for about 10 years, and finally, through a recurrence, ended up passing. And it affected Jonathan. It was like, he considers his nephews to be like his children. So it had that impact on him. And I was there to talk to him about soup, and particularly canned soup. And when do you eat Campbell's or Progresso, and why? And when somebody is in that level of pain, you're not going to have a really productive conversation about soup. You need to unpack whatever is going on. So my intuition was telling me this, just listening to him, paying attention to the nonverbal cues I was getting from him. I knew, and I could sense actually an energy kind of hovering above him that to me was, I was like, that's the nephew. The nephew's energy is here, and we need to let the nephew go just long enough for us to ultimately have a conversation about soup, because that's what we're here to do and what I'm getting paid for. But before we do that, I need to unpack all of this. And we spent 30, 40 minutes talking about his nephew, talking about the impact that had had on him and the journey that it had set him on in changing his life. So we got this really, it was a beautiful expression from him of who he is and where he is on his journey on a project about soup. And it was because I was paying attention to the cues and what was going on. We need to be present effectively when we are having our conversations with people. So when you ask that good question, you're listening to the answer. You're picking up the cues of what somebody's really saying to you, because they could say one thing, but their eyes could be communicating something else, or their body language, or you can pick up things from the environment that they're in that might tell you something more about the individual. So that's the third step. And then you get into the fourth step, integrate into understanding. When you're integrating into your understanding, the way I talk about this, and I can go back to the gun show as an example, it's like I'm hearing why people like carrying a gun and it makes them feel safe, but I still don't care for guns and I still feel threatened by that. So how do I make space in my head, kind of pull my brain apart and go, okay, my value system is that guns are wrong, we shouldn't be carrying them. But I need to make the room to accept the point of view that, hey, other people feel that it is okay and it's acceptable, and that's all right. Like, people have different ways of living their life. And so it's integrating into understanding is making room in your head to just accept the notion that there are other ways of thinking and feeling. Something I've found as I talk to people about empathy is that they are worried that they are going to have to sacrifice their own views, belief systems in order to have empathy with somebody else, because they think they're going to suddenly disappear and become this other person. And it's like, no, it's only about making room in your head to go that, hey, I like chocolate ice cream. Other people like vanilla, and that's okay. There's room for both. There's just other ways of viewing the world. And then you want to try to understand, why does that person like vanilla, and what is it about vanilla that they enjoy, so that you can then appreciate it, have empathy with them. And the fifth and final step, once you've managed all of that, and judgment keeps popping its head up like an ugly little troll that you need to just keep beating down and dismantling. But the final step is then using your solution imagination. And that's then where you're really, as they say, stepping into the shoes of somebody else, where you're really trying to see the world through their eyes. One of my favorite stories in my career, and that I cover in the book in that section, was actually, we were in Toronto on a project talking to people about recent immigrants to Canada. And as an American from the United States, to me, I would go, oh, okay, you're talking to Mexicans or people from one of the Latin American countries, which is our largest immigrant community. Canada, that's not the case. It's Asian, Chinese, and then Indian continent. So we're in the home of one Indian family, lovely couple, and I start that conversation with, okay, so the plane landed at Pearson Airport, and then what happened? Because that's, where they arrived. They got to the GTA, and it was like, now what? Somebody picked them up, and they walked me through their entire journey. What really struck me, and what I highlight in the book, this particular family, they are Hindi, and obviously, or not obviously to everybody, but in the Hindu religion, the cow is a sacred animal. So, okay, there's that piece of information. And then I started hearing about what it's like trying to get a job in Canada, or as an immigrant arriving in any country where the education certifications, qualifications aren't necessarily recognized. So this particular couple, the husband, I think, was a civil engineer back in Mumbai, and the wife was a teacher. And neither one of those certifications would transfer. So the husband got a job working on the factory floor, and he had his own adventures, having to learn to sweep the floor and do the things that he was supervising when he was on construction sites. The wife, she ended up getting a job at Burger King. I was like, okay, Burger King, flame broiled, Whopper, cow, Hindu. What would that be like? So I was using my solution imagination. I was trying to put myself into her shoes and think, what would that be like to flame broil the sacred symbol of my religion? And so I asked her to elaborate on that. But I was able to do that. I knew to do that because I was able to put myself into her shoes. Because I was able to think, wow, okay, in that experience, not only am I the newcomer, and so I'm in an unfamiliar country, but now I'm being asked to do something that's, I would think against my religion to a certain extent. And so she talked about and opened up about how difficult it was. And when you started at Burger King, you were working on the broiler line, and, there's all of the meat coming through, and sometimes the grease would like splatter up onto your lips, and trying not to, ingest that and wipe it away instead, and not think about it for what it was. And fortunately, she had some other colleagues who were also from India. So they were able to kind of support each other and help each other out. But it also then drove her and motivated her to get out of the kitchen area. And her husband worked with her to understand the Canadian monetary system and the coins and dollars and everything, so that she was able to then go and work the cash register. And she actually worked her way up to becoming the assistant manager at the Burger King. So, it was a really fascinating journey, but I was able to put myself into her shoes in order to get even more learning that was then relevant for us on that particular project. And so that's using solution imagination.
So now you've just given us the whole arc of those 5 steps to powerful empathy. Now, is this in your book, and is your book intended for a business audience trying to do market research? Because I see the applicability of those 5 steps across the board.
Yes. I'm so glad you asked that question. It is written for everybody. It's set in the exciting world of consumer insights and marketing research, where I've had those experiences. So you get to come with me into one of the dirtiest homes that I've ever been in. You get to meet these wonderful people, as I've been talking about, and many other stories. But it's written for a general audience. It is written because empathy is something that everybody can benefit from. And it has application in your personal life as well as your professional life. It comes up in every conversation we have, whether it's the clerk at the store or your boss.
Okay, so how has empathy been important in your life on a personal level?
Oh, dear. Empathy, I say that empathy is my superpower. I think we are all born with the ability to be empathetic. And I think every sentient being is actually born that way. I know some scientists have identified there's like 7 animals that demonstrate empathy. But as I've thought about it, I'm like, no, I kind of see it in other, if I watch enough nature documentaries, you can see empathy in a lot of ways where people are, or creatures, sentient beings are caring and connecting with each other and working together. And empathy fosters all of that. For myself, the lightning bolt that hit me and unlocked that superpower happened when I was growing up in Indiana in the Midwest of the United States. And I was in a very small town. We had just moved into that small town. We were outsiders. I've got that strange sounding last name that's Italian, as they used to say. And this was a town where everybody knew each other and had grown up together. And so being outside was, as I was talking about from that tribal perspective, outsiders are bad. And so one of the kids in the class decided that he and I were going to be in competition to be valedictorian someday, which in 5th grade, I was like, what's a valedictorian? And then a week or so later, he announced to everybody that I was gay, to which I was also like, what's that? And that caught on like wildfire. And I proceeded to get teased and bullied for quite a long time. And that went on for years. And so empathy kicked in for me as in a few different ways. One was how it became a survival skill. So I could use empathy, understanding other people's perspective. I couldn't get into their shoes or into their minds enough to understand why they were picking on me, but I could find out other things about their life so that I could navigate and survive. Like I was able to figure out the kind of cycle of rumors and how rumors get started. And, it's worse to have a rumor start at the beginning of the week when you've got to survive the entire school week. But if it happens on a Thursday or a Friday, I can kind of make it through that. And then the weekend will come, everybody will reset, and we start all over on Monday, typically. I was figuring those things out at 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. But empathy was helping me survive. I remember a conversation in 9th or 10th grade, maybe, where there was a girl in my class who, and we were from a very different class. I would say she was more in the sort of whatever caste you would describe, the druggies or the hoods or whatever the term is that she would use, but of Judd Nelson's character in Breakfast Club, probably. Mm-hmm. She was in that crowd. And I don't know, we started talking about what'd you do last night? And I probably watched sitcoms on TV, and she told me about how she drank a 5th of Everclear, which is basically grain alcohol. And I'd never had a drop of alcohol in my life at that point, but it was like, oh, tell me more about that. What was that like? I've never had that. And I used that to get to know her a bit better. So that then by me having empathy with her, she would hopefully she would have more positive regard for me. Mm-hmm. So that then therefore, when the rumors got started, when inevitably they would, she wouldn't necessarily engage in spreading them because she knew a little bit more about me, or we'd made that connection, or she felt supported and connected to me empathetically. So that's how empathy kind of got going for me. And then, I've continued to use it throughout my life. And now I'm in a career where that's what we do, is we build empathy with people and help our clients connect with them. And And then I get to coach the 5 steps with our audiences as well.
Beautiful. Do you see any limits in your life to empathy? Or are there times when you can't empathize, or what are your blockages?
Ooh, good question. And, I say in the book quite a few times, and I will admit I am not perfect. I am human, and judgment comes out and can get the better. You too. Yes. Amen. Amen. And I think that's so important. Like, we need to be forgiving of ourselves, but we have to keep trying. We can't give up. And so for me, empathy, as I talk about it, like, it's really hard to have empathy with the kind of emotional extremes. So on one side, you've got love. And, I kind of use the example, that time where either you or maybe your friend was so crazy in love with somebody that it was irrational and you could not figure out what they saw in that person. That's an example of not being able to have cognitive empathy with somebody. It's like, you are just so crazy in love. On the other side is hate. And that also irrational emotion that takes people to extremes. It's very difficult to try to have empathy with somebody with an active hatred. What you can do is try to understand the conditions and the environment in which they maybe grew up in or came from, so that you can then maybe not necessarily work with that individual, but maybe help prevent the situation from happening again in the future. And I use the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis last year, and Derek Chauvin. I can't understand what was going through his head, nor am I going to even try. But what was the environment, whether it was in the police department or in his upbringing, that led him to feel like that was okay? And that was okay behavior. And by understanding and having empathy with that, then we can do something to maybe correct the situation so that it doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm. So is this for you? Are you on a personal mission to bring more empathy out into the world? This book seems to be a bit of an offering and a gift. Am I catching on to something?
Yes, absolutely. This is who I am. This is what I am all about. And it is an expression of my life thus far. And so, it is a gift to the world. To me, I'm a practitioner of empathy, and I'm very fortunate to be able to express and share my story. And then hopefully others will learn from it, and be able to grow in their own lives and be more empathetic. And I think together that'll help make the world a better place.
Hear, hear. Rob, as the last question, and thank you so much for spending part of your afternoon with me and anyone listening and watching. I love asking my guests at the end of the show an experience that they've had when they're on the receiving end of empathy, and what that has meant for them. Does anything that come to mind?
The first thing that comes to my mind, and I was talking about what happened when I was growing up, and I still go to my high school reunions. I've always, I identify that I grew up in Indiana. It's where I am from. There's some, it's just part of my being. So I never deny it. I went to my 5th year high school reunion. So that would have been 1992. And one of my classmates came up to me and he said to me, he's like, a lot of people are really surprised that you're here. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he was like, you weren't treated very well. And people are really surprised that you came back. And that to me, I felt like, the checkered flag at the end of the race was being waved, because he was having empathy with me, and he had the courage and was brave enough to acknowledge to me that I had been hurt by my classmates. And that he recognized that. And that meant a great deal. So there was some empathetic connection, but more importantly, there was some empathetic repair that happened. So that made me feel better, and helped me in my own journey towards healing and ultimately to forgiveness. And I closed the book talking about how I got to forgiveness with my classmates for what happened and the realizations that I had at another high school reunion. So yeah, it's not just about being empathetic, but when somebody is empathetic towards you, it's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, it sounds like it stays with you. I certainly feel sort of like the gravitas of that conversation. And it makes me think, I've heard, I'm writing a book too, and people have said to me, sometimes you write the book you need to read. And it sounds like this book for you, I could be wrong about this, was a bit of a healing journey as well. Is that true? Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And I started it, and I did honestly start it as a business book. It is not that, but I started it as a business book, and I kind of read the early draft, and I was just like, ugh, I don't like this. I wouldn't want to read this. And I continued to get some counsel from some healers that I work with that were just like, put more of yourself into it. Mm-hmm. And so I continued to do that, and more and more. And as I was opening up and exploring my own reactions to those situations, at the gun show or with other people, the dirtiest house, and some other situations in the book, it really did help me understand myself better. And I think I write in a very honest and forthcoming way of this was what my experience was. And at the end of every chapter, I have what I call empathetic reflections. And so they're just things for people to think about related to the content of that chapter and that step, for them to think about for their own journey and their own abilities to have empathy. So yes, beautiful. Very much a healing journey.
If I had a copy, I would hold it up now, but I'll just say, tell me more about that. Solving the Empathy Crisis, one conversation at a time. I look forward to reading it. Thank you so much for spending part of your afternoon, Rob, with all of us, and good luck.
Awesome. Thank you, Anita. And good luck with your book, too. I can't wait to see that one come out.
Me too. My husband, too. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We'll see you next time at Purposeful Empathy.
What if you had access to your own council of coaches to help you break free from your thinking clutter, or make an important decision, or liberate you from whatever's holding you back? At Grand Huron International, you get to choose the coach of your choice from any place, anytime. Visit grandhuroninternational.com and harness the power on-demand coaching today.